In 2016, Hanjin Shipping, Korea's biggest container shipping line, abruptly filed for reorganization. The company had once been the country's pride and joy, a worthy sibling alongside flagship carrier Korean Air. The unexpected insolvency roiled the markets and caused global chaos in the shipping industry. Once they had been the fourth biggest container line in the world. In 2016, they had 97 ships and called on 90 different ports in over 35 countries around the world. But the company sailed into troubled waters after the global financial crisis. Freight rates crashed through the floor, and the company vanished underneath the waves. Wikipedia is hilariously terse on the whole incident, like as if they do not want to talk about it. So in this video, we're going to do a deep dive into the rise and fall of South Korea's biggest shipping line, Hanjin Shipping. But before all that, I want to talk a little bit about the Asianometry newsletter. If you subscribe to the channel, you should also subscribe to the newsletter. You can find the link to the newsletter in the video description below, or you can just go to asianometry.com. As of right now, you can expect a new newsletter every Thursday at 1 a.m. Taiwan time. Much thanks. Hanjin Shipping was established as a branch of the Hanjin Group, one of South Korea's chaebol. Chaebol as in one of the large business groups that dominate South Korea's economy. Hanjin Group began in 1945 with founder Cho Chung-hoon and a few trucks. His first jobs came from the U.S. Army, trucking military supplies around the country. From the very beginning, his companies would focus on the transportation space. Cho performed well, and for that he received additional American contracts after the Korean War. Cho needed to scale up his business to meet this new demand, but transportation is a very risky business. To get the capital to fund Hanjin's expansion, Cho turned to the national government. President Park Chung-hee needed loyal companies to buy in on his economic growth plan. Those who signed on got generous loans from state banks. Hanjin Group profited handsomely from their cooperation and loyalty. Then, in the 1960s, the United States entered the Vietnam War. The war effort necessitated an immense logistics effort to bring supplies to the war zones of Vietnam. The war was good business for one American shipping company, Sealand Service. Founder Malcolm McLean, a former trucker, invented the practice of packing goods into standardized containers, which made them much easier to ship across various forms of transportation. The Vietnam War allowed Sealand to really shine, and it was there in 1966, Vietnam, that Cho Chung-hoon first saw and experienced the future of marine shipping. A decade later, in 1977, Cho would found Hanjin Shipping. Alongside Korean Air, Korea's flagship airline, which was acquired in 1969, Hanjin Shipping would be the business group's crown jewel. If your economy depends on trade, then your economy needs to have maritime shipping. Shipping is the backbone of globalization, carrying some 80% of the world's trade by volume. Without it, international trade would be impossible. Container shipping is one of the three categories of the overall seaborne transportation industry. The other two are bulk and tanker trade. Bulk carriers ship unpackaged goods like coal or grain. Tankers carry liquids or gases like oil. Counting by total capacity volume, bulk and tanker transport are far larger than container. But because containers can carry more valuable goods, they punch above their weight class in terms of value of goods shipped. These valuable shipments make the container industry quite competitive. I briefly talked about the history of the shipping industry in my video about Neptune Orient lines. Feel free to watch that for a historical primer. In 1972, South Korea as a whole had just 3 container vessels of their own. Most container trade was carried in and out of the country by foreign liners. The Korean government decided that it needed to develop its indigenous container capacity. New policies encouraged the first generation of containerized shipping lines. In 4 years, the country had 36 ships and 5 shipping lines that offered international container services. Despite this, 90% of Korean container exports and imports still came on foreign carriers. So in 1976, the Korean government began explicitly subsidizing Korean container carriers, though never more than $1 million USD a year in 1976 dollars, to each of the carriers. They also established the Korea Maritime and Port Administration to guide the industry's development. Hanjin Shipping came at the right time to take advantage of this national policy push. Hanjin bought new ships to expand their container service lines as fast as they could. A year after their founding, Hanjin offered its first Middle East service. In 1979, the company joined with Sealand to offer a low-cost, high-value service across the Pacific. That same year, however, the shipping industry ran headfirst into the 1979 oil crisis and the subsequent macroeconomic slowdown. The Korean government consolidated their shipping lines from 70 to 20 and offered aid to the rest. Hanjin Shipping did not get bailed out with public money, but in 1986, sister company Korean Air did have to temporarily step in to help the company through the tough times. Hanjin Shipping quickly recovered and turned a profit thereafter, but keep that little bit in mind for later. Hanjin is founded in 1977, grows like a weed, then needs a pseudo bailout from its chaebol sibling company less than a decade after its founding. I want to stop here and check to see if you are noticing a little pattern developing here, and that is that the shipping industry has got some serious whiplash issues. This is not an uncommon pattern situation in the industry. Demand in the shipping industry has exploded over the years. This demand is tied to macroeconomic factors like the health of the world economy, seasonality, and random new shocks. Seasonality is often short-term and can be prepared for instance, the holiday seasons when companies start shipping over Christmas goods. It is the random shocks, upwards or down, that can really rattle the industry. Supply, on the other hand, is nowhere near as adjustable as demand. Demand can spike or shrink by 20% year over year, but liners' options for growing or shrinking capacity are nowhere near as flexible. I'll briefly go through three major options. Number one, acquire a competitor. The larger a shipping line gets, the more economies of scale they have. But these purchases are never that clean. Few companies are good at integrating different lines. If companies aren't careful, it can ruin them. Number two, commissioning a brand new ship to be built at the shipyards. But since it takes years to build a new boat, the timing and pricing at which you do this is essential. You're putting down millions of dollars for a boat that might launch at the exact wrong time in the business cycle. At the opposite end of the spectrum, the company might scrap a boat to reduce the size of the fleet during times of low demand and oversupply. This is pretty drastic, though. Finally, number three, chartering, which is kind of like renting a ship from its actual owner. The charterer takes care of cargo and voyage expenses like fuel, while the ship's owner takes care of operations and capital costs like interest. Charter contracts can last for just a few weeks or up to 20 years. These three options all suck in their own way, and companies have to properly evaluate and balance market share and market risk when deciding to expand or shrink their fleet. The wrong decision can be disastrous. The late 1980s and early 90s saw a massive Korean export boom. From 1987 to 1997, South Korean international trade tripled in volume. This tailwind benefited the Korean shipping industry, who positioned themselves as a low-cost alternative to high-priced Western shipping lines. Throughout this period, the Korean government carefully managed the industry like a bonsai tree. Companies could only operate on specific routes, and new entrants could not enter the domestic market. For instance, Korea Marine Transport Corporation and Hanjin got the lucrative Korea to US West Coast lanes. Hyundai was forced off those routes and could only run to Japan and Taiwan. Between 1986 and 1990, Hanjin more than doubled its carrying capacity from 24,856 TEU, which stands for 20-foot equivalent units, a unit of carrying capacity, to 53,140 TEU. It achieved this growth organically and through merging with competitors. In 1988, Hanjin was allowed to acquire the struggling Korea Shipping Corporation to become the 13th largest container shipping line in the world and the largest in South Korea. And then in 1997, they acquired DSR Senator, Germany's second largest carrier. This made them the fourth largest shipping lane in the world. Only Sealand, Maersk, and Evergreen were larger. 1997 would see the very peak of the conditions creating the Hanjin shipping monolith. After this, those forces began to dry up and things started to decline. The Korean export boom years of the 1990s ended with the Asian financial crisis. Korea had been one of the worst offenders throughout this period and needed a financial bailout from the International Monetary Fund, or IMF. IMF money comes with strings attached. They required policy changes in line with neoliberal governance beliefs of the time. I'm not really going to comment on the wisdom or long term benefit of these, it is what it is, but I'll run through a few of the ones significant to the story. First, the Korean government was forced to liberalize its shipping business and open the market up to foreign players. A little bit of deregulation had already been on the way, but the IMF forced it through much faster. Now, suddenly, the Korean shippers were fully exposed to the open market. Second, the Korean government mandated that all of its business conglomerates reduce their debt to equity loads to below 200%. This is regardless of business or industry conditions. Hanjin Shipping, along with many other Korean lines, was forced to sell off ships they owned to pay off debt and charter new ships to fill in for the loss in capacity. Sometimes they would sell the ships to a third party and then charter them back into the fleet. Hanjin had to do this with 29 of their own ships. This sale-leaseback type of transaction helps improve a company's debt-equity ratio, since those debts come off the books. But the catch is that the company now has to bear significantly higher operating costs, because those banks and third parties get to charge higher short-term prices. I don't think it was the government's intention, but nevertheless, this combination of higher operating costs amidst new competition from foreigners would lead to a long-term decline in Korea's indigenous shipping lines. In 2002, Hanjin founder Cho Chung-hoon died at the age of 82. For the most part, the media was pretty complimentary. The Hanjin patriarch was lionized in the media as a great industrialist, and I guessed artist, who helped contribute to Korea's rise to riches. The godfather of Korea's transport industry. But Cho's death papered over the fact that the guy was being investigated for massive tax evasion fraud dating back to the 1970s, and his heirs were nowhere near as respected. Cho had 5 children, including 4 sons. Like with the founder of the Ming Dynasty, the sons warred over the various parts of the empire. The eldest son, Cho Yang-ho, was named the Hanjin Group chairman. But his brothers received pieces of the empire: the shipbuilding arm, the securities insurance divisions. Son Cho Soo-ho received Hanjin Shipping. They all broke off from the main group, leaving the eldest Cho with Korean Air and what remained of the company. Famously, Cho Yang-ho's daughter would be the one involved in the 2014 nut rage incident. Thought that was pretty funny. Anyway, the big thing that happened was that Hanjin Shipping could no longer rely on its siblings to carry it through times of hardship. Remember, Korean Air had to pull an undeclared bailout in 1986. The sibling rivalry put the company on dangerous ground at a time when it needed all the backing it could get. 2007 and 2008 saw a new recovery after several tough macroeconomic years. Hanjin saw the opportunity to grow. So they decided to invest in the future, following leader Maersk in purchasing a new round of mega ships. The problem was that they ordered at the exact wrong time. By November 2008, 2 months after the Lehman Brothers bankruptcy, Hanjin had committed to orders for nearly 250,000 TEU worth of ships. This corresponded to a 40% increase in their fleet size. The titanic economic slowdown that followed the global financial crisis of 2008 sparked a shipping overcapacity crisis. Trade between the United States and Asia declined by 10%. On the company front, Maersk lost $2 billion that year. CMA CGM, $889 million. And those were the market leaders. It takes years to work off an oversupply cycle like this, so the losses continued to roll in and debt soared. In 2012, Hanjin had about 195 billion Korean won, or 165 million USD in debt. By 2014, that number soared to 440 billion won, or $375 million. To pay for this, Hanjin began stripping itself of its most profitable assets. They sold domestic and overseas terminals. They sold their liquefied natural gas tanker ship divisions. They sold their bulk shipping division. Soon, all that was left to Hanjin Shipping was the volatile container shipping line. But it would not be enough. Korea Development Bank, or KDB, was the largest creditor. In 2016, they demanded 700 billion won, or $615 million. The best the company could come up with was 500 billion won, or $440 million. The last chance was for a government bailout. Other countries bailed out their shipping lines. Denmark lent $6 billion to Maersk in 2011. Germany lent $1.8 billion to Hapag-Lloyd. France $660 million to CMA CGM. China gave $9.5 billion to Costco and China Shipping. So why not Korea? But KDB had to deal with another troubled shipping line, Hyundai Merchant Marine. They demanded the two restructure their chartering contracts, cut their debt further, and get capital injections from their ownership families. Hyundai was able to do it. Hanjin could not. And that was that. The Korean government's decision not to bail out Hanjin had echoes of the Lehman bankruptcy in 2008. The point is legitimate. Nobody wants to shovel taxpayer money to corporate fat cats, least of all to the family of the nut rage lady. But perhaps there could have been a better way to deliver such a message. Hanjin's August insolvency would roil the markets and lay utter chaos to the entire shipping market. 159 companies found themselves unable to bring in their cargo. Hanjin stopped paying its terminal fees, and $14 billion worth of goods were stranded at sea. This included critical Korean export goods, as Hanjin shipped 40% of Samsung's electronics and 20% of LG's. Walmart had 3,000 containers at sea or in terminals at the time of Hanjin's collapse. They had to purchase additional shipyards to store empty containers after unloading. Hanjin's collapse also annihilated tens of thousands of shipyard jobs in both Korea and the Philippines. They had been the owner of the Subic Bay shipyard there. Trade groups and unions protested vigorously, but the Korean government stood firm. Knowing what is known now, I wonder if the Korean government would still make the same decision again. Singapore, for their part, had faced a similar decision with their national champion container line, Neptune Orient Lines. They opted to divest themselves of the industry, tired of the years of operating losses. Shortly before the Hanjin collapse, NOL was sold to French operator CMA CGM for $2.4 billion USD. Hanjin's collapse helped the NOL division turn a profit shortly after its sale. On the other hand, in the fourth quarter of 2016, the Taiwan government bailed out their own two container shipping lines, Evergreen and Yangming. The nation relies on shipping firms to transport goods that come in large quantities, which is key to our economic development, said Wang Kuo-tsai, Taiwan's Deputy Minister of Transportation. Hanjin's collapse shows us that the government has to provide support to the industry before the damage becomes uncontrollable. At the heart of it, Hanjin died for two reasons. The first was that the company ran into a working capital crisis despite still owning a plethora of profitable assets. Poor chartering practices left the company with unprofitable ships, and after the founder's death and the splitting up of his transportation empire, there would be no rich sibling company to step in with extra cash to save the day. The second big reason was that the government decided not to bail the company out. Other companies made the same mistakes Hanjin did, but they got backing from their governments. But after many years of supporting the industry as a core national interest, the Korean government seemed to have made a decision that it would no longer do so. After entering court receivership, Hanjin attempted to negotiate with its chartering and debt partners for a way out, but with over 1.3 trillion Korean won, or $1 billion USD, in charter fees owed over the next 12 months, the company could do nothing. They declared bankruptcy, and that would be that. The last ship belonging to Hanjin Shipping finally sold off in March 2017 for demolition. That's it for tonight. Thanks for watching. If you want more content, you can like and subscribe to the channel. The feed will show you a bunch more videos like this one to watch. Remember to hit up the email newsletter, the Patreon if you want to support the work. And take care of yourselves out there. If you want to send me an email, drop me a line at john@asianometry.com. I love reading your emails. You can introduce yourself, suggest a topic, or more. Until next time, I'll see you guys later.